not knowing where to look for it, and feeling quite alone.
What was wonderful for me about iSyllabus was
it felt very familiar and it was very accessible.
It was a structured learning process. It was done in a teaching manner which was very relaxed.
You know, it wasn't in pieces, it was continuous and it flowed like a river.
they understood where the younger people and people like me were coming from.
It was so evidence-based, it was logical, it was easy to follow.
And it truly is transformational when you understand that you can live your life with ease.
It was having the knowledge to be able to physically carry out worship, but also having that intention there to match that worship.
One of the most important changes that happens when you go through iSyllabus is the spiritual development that happens.
Opening your mind, opening your horizons, looking at the depths of spirituality that people have felt and experienced for centuries, there put on a plate in front of you.
And going through iSyllabus and going through the learning with teachers that have that grounding in traditional knowledge and academia.
I felt more grounded in my foundations.
iSyllabus kind of like just showed me how to live as a human, how to live as a Muslim.
It's designed for people in the UK. It's designed in English, but the scholars are so knowledgeable that they can make even the most complicated things simple for you.
And I'm so grateful for the fact that I can teach my children the basics at a young age, the confusion which I had growing up.
But without iSyllabus giving me that base knowledge to take that step, I don't believe that I would be where I am today.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. What a beautiful clip there to start this evening's session. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you everybody for joining us on this evening's iSyllabus live session. My name is Amir Deen, and this evening I am with the wonderful Shaykh RUZWAN as we talk about this topic, Mawlids to methods it's called. So thank you very much everyone for joining, and hopefully inshallah there'll be some benefit in this evening's discussion. So yeah, what we're talking about this evening, we're talking about something that I think there's lots of differing opinions on. There's quite often a lot of online debates and also a lot of confusion in the community, and I hope inshallah this evening we'll be able to discuss those in a little bit of depth with Shaykh RUZWAN. And of course, if you have any questions, please do feel free to post them into the chats wherever you are, and inshallah we'll do our best to get around them. And I think it's important to emphasize from the outset that the objective here and the goal is to increase our learning, not to create division, not to argue over these types of things, but ultimately to increase our learning from our teachers. So without further ado, inshallah, I would like to welcome our teacher, Shaykh RUZWAN. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome to this, which is the first in a series of Monday lives that we'll have, inshallah, in the run-up to our diploma course. So obviously, we kind of choose issues that are topical, and I've got a number of issues I want to discuss over the next couple of weeks. The one I thought was relevant because it's just come up in my kind of conversations with people is what we've chosen today, which is the Mawlid of the Prophet ﷺ, and not necessarily looking at the kind of legal theological arguments that go on, even though we could go into that. And I've always been told to kind of calm down in the Arabic referencing and kind of bring it down to a more simple discussion for people. And inshallah, that's me. I've been kind of muted in that sense. But, you know, there is a lot to be had to revisit these questions, such as the Mawlid of the Prophet ﷺ, especially if you juxtapose it to the issue about people saying, well, what's the point of it if there's so many other important things that can be done in the community? And in fact, if we look at the situation in Gaza, you know, today, just a couple of hours ago, I was reading about, you know, a whole panel of experts in genocide, having come to a conclusion now, almost 2 years into this conflict, we can call it conflict, that it is genocide, and so when those things are on the horizons for Muslims, and you've got the floods in Pakistan, you've got ongoing conflict in Sudan, and you've got the kind of decimation in the Muslim world generally. We've talked about it so many times. The Mawlid of the Prophet ﷺ, what it is. I mean, obviously you'd want to know what it is. It always comes and it's almost like one of these themes that I see all the time is that people fear the consequences of having any joy in their lives. And I don't know if you've kind of come up with this kind of predicament. People celebrate, or they have meals, or they go out with friends, and they feel a degree of guilt enjoying themselves when there's so many things happening in the world. And so this issue of the Mawlid almost becomes symptomatic of the need to revise and review our priorities. I think a lot of people would view it in that way.
Yeah. So, Shaykh, that's a brilliant introduction, and you're right, it's definitely a predicament that a lot of us find ourselves in, certainly, as you said, with so much happening in the world, particularly in Gaza, and there's almost a sense of guilt when enjoying certain elements of our lives and the luxuries that we have. But Shaykh, if we could initially bring it back in terms of this, the literal word, when we talk about the Mawlid, and also a definition of where that comes from, and why is that term used, and what does it actually mean? I'm just thinking about potential audience members who don't have that understanding of the term and what it means.
Yeah, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, if you want to go into the technicalities, Mawlid comes from walad, wilada, and Mawlud is like a child. And the Prophet ﷺ famously, very famous hadith, everyone will know it in the meaning, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدْ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. Every child that's born is born upon the natural state, natural disposition. In other words, this natural state of purity. So Mawlud is a child that's born, and every child that's born is born in this state of purity. Now, Mawlid, it comes from the same root, walad, son or child, and it specifically indicates either a place. I mean, in Arabic, it can either indicate a place or a time. So it indicates either a place or time of the birth of a person. Now, when you say al-Mawlid, and you just say it like that, or in the subcontinent, they call it milad. Milad is essentially the same, from the same root, same kind of connotations. You are ascribing or describing a birth, and the birth that you're describing is the most important, most superfluous, most significant birth that you can imagine, which is the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. So in general, in Arabic, if you just use a word, what it indicates always is the best manifestation of that. So when we talk about the Mawlid, we're talking about the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. Unless you say the Mawlid of AMER, when you were born, or how, I don't want to embarrass you and say how old you were. You were commenting about the fact that I've got so many grey hair. My Mawlid is well before your Mawlid, a couple of decades into the past, distant past. So that's al-Mawlid of my Mawlid. I have to say it's my Mawlid, but the Prophet ﷺ's Mawlid is the Mawlid. And so it's either the place or the time. And in fact, if you've been on Umrah with me or in Hajj, I always go and take people on walking tours, and we visit the Mawlid of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, which is the specific place he was born, ﷺ. So it's now a library. It was his birthplace, just towards the side of the Sa'i, Safa and Marwa. Still preserved, still known, still honored by people that know it. That's the physical place. And there's also, more significantly, is the time. And so this is why it comes up in Rabiʿ al-Awwal. Rabiʿ al-Awwal is one of the 12 Islamic months, the lunar calendar that we follow. And it's literally called the first spring. And it is the month within which the Prophet ﷺ did many things. In fact, he emigrated and arrived into the city of Madinah al-Nawwara after the Hijrah in the month of Rabiʿ al-Awwal. He ﷺ was born in the month of Rabiʿ al-Awwal, and most scholars would say, they mention a specific date. And then also he passed away, ﷺ, we know, in the month of Rabiʿ al-Awwal. And his passing away, if you looked at Jalaluddin Rumi, the passing away of a spiritual person is almost like a moving into a more perfect state. but for the people that he left behind, it was a momentous, catastrophic event, as you know. So the Mawlid is essentially marking a time in which the Prophet ﷺ came upon the earth, and it's a type of marking, meaning it's significant and it's known, and therefore around it is a degree of commemoration. I wouldn't say celebration, because people would say, even Arabic, the term that they might use is ihtifal, which is like a celebration. But even that word is it's a neologism. It's a new kind of structuring of what essentially is commemorating and marking a signification in a calendar. Like Ashura, like the 10th of Muharram, is indicating specific events that happened, the saving of the Prophet Musa, and all these events that indicate God's blessing upon people. The Prophet's birth in and of itself is, what would you think? Would it be a moment of happiness or sadness for a believer? It would be, it's the first manifestation of this person that would bring so much meaning to people, even in this day and age we live in. I mean, religion has no significant meaning in any other religious tradition apart from Islam. In Christianity, the kind of mores and beliefs have disappeared. In Judaism, they're hell-bent on essentially eating up themselves in trying to ascertain what the Prophet Moses, they believe, taught. And other religions are just kind of cultural affiliations with kind of no impact on real life. And Islam has this amazing impact on people that it actually has something special to say. So the person that came with it, you would imagine commemorating and marking a specific point, month or day, or sitting or majlis or event just to commemorate him. I think would be important. I think that's how you'd understand the Mawlid in that sense.
Thank you, Shaykh. And I think the way you've just explained it there, certainly for myself and for anybody who's listening, seems very rational, very logical, very reasonable. But that then leads me into, one of the more realistic questions that we face here, which is, why is it such a controversial kind of area, shall we say? Why is it such a sensitive topic for people, and why is there such a divide of opinion on the Mawlid itself?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into, as I said before, the kind of theological ongoing discussions about that. And a reason for that is not that I don't want to go into them, but I think they're actually insignificant and not they're not worthy of discussion, because if you strip it back to what what I've said is commemorating and marking a specific date, we know the Prophet ﷺ, he used to fast on Mondays, and he was asked, why do you fast on Mondays? And he says, this is the day I was born. You could have stopped there. I mean, the moment that he's asked a question and he says it's the day I was born, well, he's connected worship with the day he's born. Whatever it is, there's a logical connection between an event that took place and him doing an act of goodness. In other words, a type of commemoration. And so from that perspective, it seems to be pretty logical that you can commemorate the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, if you want to take it literally and become a textualist in the Islamic tradition, you could mark your own birthday by fasting the day. If you go back and find out what day in Islamic terms you were born, you can make that. But why is the Prophet fasting on that day? Because he was born, but also he was given revelation on that day, which means it's more significant. We have, the hadith in Bukhari, which is mu'allaq, but he collected it in his collection about, Abu Jahl. He set free a servant of his, a slave of his, out of joy because the Prophet was born. So it said that his punishment was lessened because of that, just because that simple thing. So there's lots of anecdotal evidence that is okay to mark it. It always comes back to this issue of bid'ah, which is innovation and doing something that the early community did not in a technical way do.
Yeah.
I mean, that discussion, I think that boat has sailed a long time ago. Any scholar worth their salt in this day and age will follow the scholars who were worth their salt in the past, who generally in the four madhabs generally agreed that, an innovation, if it has a precedence, it's perfectly plausible, acceptable, sometimes obligatory, sometimes recommended to follow if there's a need. And this day and age, if you think about it, the thing that stripped us of any power and significance is what I would say Mustafa Sabri mentioned, which is, you know, he's a great scholar, Ottoman scholar, Shaykh al-Islam, who said that the Muslim Ummah in this age has fallen short and fallen into decline because of two things. One of which is demystifying, you know, the spiritual aspects of the faith, which also includes the Prophet ﷺ being taken from being a prophet of God who was given revelation and is elevated in the eyes of God, to being simply a great leader, you know, just a great tactician, a great politician, a great economist, a great strategist, a great warrior, military man. But no, at the core of him was that he was a messenger of God. He received a message from God, and he was spiritual. And the second thing he mentioned was this disconnecting of that with the Ummah, this idea that we are one body, and whatever happens in Gaza or Sudan or anywhere there's people that say La ilaha illallah, that's significant to us. And so if you strip your connection from the Prophet away, you essentially have no motor. You know, internally in any kind of vehicle, you have a motor that has energy and it pushes something towards something. The energy of people, or the early community, was essentially the Prophet ﷺ, the first companions. When they were, the battle cry, you know, in Yarmouk was Ya Muhammadah, O Muhammad. You know, when they were imagine you're in a street fight, and imagine it was a religious street fight. Let's just go there, and then you get slaughtered with all these opposition people, and then all of a sudden you say Ya Muhammadah, and you just get back, and it creates this kind of sense of camaraderie and bravery within you. That's what the companions did after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ. That connection to the Prophet was what pushed them to do amazing feats. That's the thing that Khalid bin Walid, you know, was connected to when he, you know, in the Battle of Yarmouk, his helmet came off in the midst of battle, and he actually forgot it came off because he was so enthralled in the battle. And when he looked, he couldn't find his helmet. And why did he want his helmet? Not to protect himself, but it was because he used to place a hair of the Prophet ﷺ within the helmet. So he took that into battle, and his connection to the Prophet ﷺ was the thing that made him almost invincible, you know, the sword of God. You know, Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, his connection to the Prophet ﷺ was something that even after the Prophet's death, it stopped him from calling the adhan. It was that connection, that motor that pushed them towards the amazing things that they did. They got to the gates of China and the gates of France, Europe, on the basis of this amazing love of the Prophet ﷺ. Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, when he was on his deathbed, he pleaded that a hair of his which was in his house be brought and placed on his tongue, under his tongue, so he was buried with the hair of the Prophet in his mouth when he was buried. Now that connection is not an innovation. This is the people that sat, ate, drank, went to war, and smiled and joked with the Prophet ﷺ. The motor was the love of the Prophet ﷺ. In this day and age, you know, when there's so much distraction and there's so many means of gaining dopamine, as an ummah, as a community, you have to ignite that spiritual connection with something that's tangible and you can see, which is the Sīrah of the Prophet ﷺ, which is the Shama'il, the beautiful qualities of the Prophet ﷺ, the names of the Prophet ﷺ and his characteristics. You have to have some excuse to connect with them. And you could say, Amir, you could say, well, we can do that all through the year. But you know, and I know, and everybody knows that you need excuses to do stuff. Think of any life coach, business coach. They will say you have to have an excuse to get up and do your fitness regime, your diet regime, your intellectual development regime, your character, you know, development regime. Everything needs an excuse, timing, and an anniversary to see how well you've done. And, you know, in Ramadan, we have that. We have the Hajj, we have seasons. And this is just another excuse. I mean, as long as are we talking about people walking about having whiskey? What are we talking about when we talk about, you know, why we shouldn't do it? But that begs a very good, important question, which is it enough to celebrate it or commemorate it or mark it? And this is where it becomes more important, because I absolutely agree with people that say that, you know, we need to see an effect of that, which is what I've essentially been saying. You know, when I mentioned all these companions, what I was essentially saying is there was a proof that they were connected to Prophet ﷺ. And I think a lot of people now, I mean, I would say armchair critics of this. Alhamdulillah, some are not. Some don't commemorate the Mawlid. And I don't have a problem with that at all. In fact, you know, I personally, you know, you don't go out and seek out, you know, gatherings of Mawlid. You know, if there's one and I'm immediately there, I don't have a problem sitting there, but I don't go out seeking them. But I can see the amazing fuel that it gives to a real believer who then is moved towards action. But there's many people that don't mark it. And, you know, if they can get that motivation, absolutely great. But they have to remember that the early companions in that community, if there was anything that gave them a superiority over us, it was that connection to the Prophet ﷺ. And we need to find an excuse to reconnect with the Prophet ﷺ.
Yeah, and I think you just mentioned there, Shaykh, about, you know, you said if there wasn't a specific gathering, you perhaps wouldn't go looking for one. However, finding yourself within one, you know, and even when you've seen them before or observed them before, you've seen the beauty of it. I think it brings up the question: what is it that we seek to gain? What should be the objective when we go to a particular Mawlid? When we go there, you've spoken about strengthening that love for the Prophet ﷺ. Like, what other sort of what should we seek to gain from attending you know, such gatherings?
I think there is a significance to time. I mean, you know, I would say that, you know, in the same way as you have Ramadan, you have the days of Hajj, there is a significance in a celestial, you know, higher spiritual sense of the specific time that the Prophet was brought into the earth physically as a child. That has a significance which to seek out and to be in the presence of other people that are seeking that, I think in and of itself is a great blessing. Because it comes under the generality of hilaq al-dhikr. The Prophet mentioned, you know, if you find a gathering of remembrance of God, then farta'u, you know, you should take part in it. It comes under that, but it also comes under the amazing opportunity of doing something that the companions did. I mean, I've got a book here in my library by Ibn Sayyid al-Nas, who he collected over 200 companions who wrote poetry about the Prophet ﷺ. So they wrote poetry about him in his presence, and they recited it in front of him. We have a couple of lines from Abu Bakr, lines from Fatima radiallahu anha, lines from every illustrious companion praising the Prophet ﷺ. And when you go to a Mawlid, essentially they're reciting poems that were written by either companions or like Zayd bin Thabit, Abdullah ibn Rawaha, or there's great scholars of the past that have written as well. You know, it's a labor of love, isn't it? If you've ever been in love, you know, essentially you do write poetry, because shi'r is from shu'ur, which is to allow the swelling up of a feeling that's within you through words. You know, and sometimes they talk about poetry in motion. If you're unable to write or to articulate words, you can still live a life which shows your love to somebody. You know, some of the greatest poetry is not written. Some of the greatest poetry is by people who are unlettered, unable to speak, unable to articulate 2 sentences, but their life was a testimony to the love. And essentially that's the kind of segue I think that I would want to go into, which is, you know, the most significant, powerful Mawlid would be a person that just lives their life trying to just emulate the character of the Prophet ﷺ. That person would be a Mawlid. I mean, that person would have, you know, in the subcontinent have all the green lights, and it's like Christmas, Father Christmas vibes going on. You know, if they were to manifest themselves in that way, they would be a walking Mawlid, because essentially that's the ask, isn't it? The Mawlid is an excuse to create that type of person. You know, our children should have that affinity with the Prophet ﷺ, that they're intrigued by him because of how amazing he was with kids. You know, this is why Imam Ahmad Zarruq said that one of the signs of the awliya is that the children are enamored and drawn towards them because of that significance that is selfless. You know, the awliya are always selfless. They're not interested in themselves as much as the person in front of them. And the Prophet was always in the service of people around him. So yeah, I mean, you can make criticisms, but I think you should acknowledge the criticism, because I think a lot of times it comes from a good place. Yeah. And I think the great feeling of people that commemorate the Mawlid, that they dismiss it or get into arguments or debates. mean, I to this day, I've never remembered getting into a debate or argument about this topic. Because essentially, if I met somebody who disagreed, I mean, within a couple of minutes, we would agree with what I said. No, we would agree that it's not as simple as that person was saying, because I think they kind of miss the point by simplifying it to this caricature of people that don't pray, don't fast, don't really believe in Islam, but they get a good opportunity to have a sing along in the mosque or have some food, and that's it. I mean, that caricature is a straw man argument, isn't it? It's not really substantial.
I think, just speaking from personal experience, I think what you've spoken about there in terms of the poetry and the increasing the love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you've got that element there. But I would also say from the gatherings that I've been to as well, Shaykh, there's definitely a sense of bringing the community together as well, bringing people together from within the community. There's always been opportunities of learning as well. So they'll be covering, as you talked about there, the Shamil, and also teachings of the Sīrah. I've always found particularly the gatherings to be, not just about the poetry and the sort of, as you were saying, the sing-alongs, but actually an opportunity to connect with people within the community and grow your kind of learning and understanding. But you spoke there about the strong arms and the critics and the whatnot, and I'm trying to be very careful about how I position the questions to you as well, in terms of what the public perception or misrepresentation perhaps may be. And I feel that certainly a lot of the younger generation that I've perhaps interacted with have always come forward with the sort of questions around what they perhaps see online. There's various gatherings of people who may, look borderline possessed, people running around in circles at certain gatherings. I mean, I just wanted to bring that up and ask, in terms of attending these types of gatherings, how should we understand that? How should we be understanding those types of clips that we're seeing, where there is a type of dhikr gathering, where there are maybe types of Mawlids where people, appear to be, I'm using the word possessed, it might not be the right word for it, but you know what I'm trying to say there. They seem as if they're having some type of outer body experience.
Allahu Akbar. I never thought you'd bring that question up. You should be a politician. The way you brought that in was such a sort of callous question. So look, Mawlid is exactly what I've described. I'm not responsible for people going to trances or being possessed or running about in circles, but essentially you have strange cases in all segments of society. You have people that are, kind of more austere Puritan in their Islam. Amongst those are people that blow people up. So you could say, well, I love this idea of going back to the Quran and Sunnah, but there's all these people that you ascribe to the same thing you're doing, but they're actually, burning, ISIS essentially was, I'm not going to go into sectarian stuff here, but you started it. So every phenomena in human nature has extremities towards it.
Yeah. And
the policing of that is important. So scholars have always done that, and in this day and age you have to make, if I was in a gathering like that and I saw somebody do this, there would definitely be sparks flying, because Imam Malik was asked about people who danced about, and he was described, and it was described to him, and he was asked what his opinion was, and he says, are they mad, are they possessed, like what's the problem here? He couldn't conceptualize it, because it's not within what he accepted and expected a believer to do. And so all those things, they're culled by the Quran and Sunnah, the basic common sense that you have. That is just people going into extremities, which is not part of what we're talking about. Even dhikr, for example. I have a lot of friends from Chechnya, Dagestan. They have specific war dances that they do with dhikr. So that's part of their culture. It's a type of exercise, it's a type of dhikr, it's a type of a movement that is specific to their culture. But I think people that, go into a static state, sometimes you can't control them, but that's not what we're talking about. Mawlid is you're sitting, you have a small reminder about the Prophet ﷺ, you have some poetry that's recited, which goes all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ usually. And that's it. What's the problem with that? You can't just say, well, what about all these other things that take place in the world? they're not irrelevant to our discussion. If they take place, you just have to condemn them and analyze them on a case-by-case basis. And I think in doing that, scholars just need to be a bit more clear about that, a bit more straightforward.
I'm not going to throw you any other curveball questions.
No, on you go. Please do.
No, do you know what it is? I genuinely believe that, as I said to you, the engagement that I have with the younger generation, with people who are not familiar with that, the first argument they bring up, and as I said there is a misrepresentation and a misconception as to what happens at these particular gatherings. Social media has a big part to play in that, because cultural or spiritual expressions are taken out of context, etc., etc. But as you said, there is a extremity that we, as a minority, or there are areas of our community, etc., that may indulge.
No, I think it's all communities. It's like if you talk about, like, imagine you met a Labour supporter, and you said, well, you support X, Y, and Z, and you sanction X, Y, and Z. Not necessarily the case, because that person might have opted out of that. But yeah, it's true that the organization as a whole does, but it's very difficult to and to flip that discussion and place that problematic on all of the people. It's just human nature that you have extremes everywhere.
Yeah, and so if again coming back to the pockets in our community of people who may want to connect, who may want to get involved in celebrating or commemorating or marking, and you use those three different words. You went from celebrating to commemorating to marking. So anybody who is looking to do that in a kind of spiritual, sound way, what kind of advice would you give to those types of people? Because there is that sort of, perhaps for some people, I'm not sure if I want to go here or go there, or I'm not sure what to expect. What is the kind of expectations, and what kind of advice would you give to people who wanted to mark or commemorate the Mawlid in a sound way, Shaykh?
So if you understand what I said about Mawlid, it's time or place, and it's not an event, so it's not like a gathering. The Mawlid is a moment, a point in your calendar where you can reassess your connection to the Prophet ﷺ. Like, where are you in relation to his manners, his amazing characteristics, his Sīrah, all the kind of things that cross with your life. In terms of the crossroads that you're in within your own life, how many of those could be solved if you took the prophetic method, and you don't? And then why are you not doing it? So, in a sense, for me, it's like you're really fine-tuning your life in a very specific way with the Sīrah of the Prophet ﷺ and the Shama'il, which is the qualities of the Prophet ﷺ, and also his names, and then looking at how do they, how well do you do in your life based upon that. Every man and woman can do that, because the Prophet was an amazing human, which meant that his sunnah was as available for women as it was for men. And so that's, for me, if you want to start it, you start with that introspection. You sit with yourself and you just question yourself about, where am I in mending the ties of kinship, friendship, fighting injustice in a way that's prophetic as well. So fighting injustice, there's many ways that people do it nowadays. There's postmodernism, which has a complete deconstruction of all values. Everything is justified as long as the end is something that is desirable. That's not the prophetic method. And so the Mawlid reminds you that you have to live in accordance with what the Prophet came with. And so that takes you into a life of study, a life of introspection, and it places this interesting mirror in front of you, which is, where am I in relation to the Prophet ﷺ? Because the Prophet was harisun alaykum. He was called the person that was concerned about other people. He wasn't concerned about himself, he was concerned about other people. He was called Muhammad ﷺ because he was the one that was granted immense praise by God. He was called Ahmed because he was the most praised in the heavens. Why was he most praised in the heavens? Because the prophets before him who came were told about this person, Ismuhu Ahmed, his name is Ahmed, and he will be praised because he will do things you were never even have dreamt of doing. This is the prophets, all the prophets, like the Prophet Isa, Prophet Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, all those prophets knew and mentioned him. And so all these prophets prior to him are mentioning him, I would imagine we'd want to mention him, because they are, you know, they are not just talking about his religion, they're talking about him. They're talking about him as his name and his significance as a person. And so when we're marking the Mawlid, we're essentially doing that. But then with the names, with the characteristics, it then, you know, pivots into this discussion about, you can't just go to a gathering and then go home and be the same person. You can't just go back to a dysfunctional marriage and just, you know, brush everything under the carpet and not address the real issues. You can't just go into a situation where you have authority or you have a degree of leverage in society and you just don't use it.
Yeah.
You can't be a person who has the ability to, you know, do amazing things with your work situation, and you just, those skill sets are not being used for the faith. You know, I was listening to, you know, somebody sent me a clip of a good friend of mine's from High Wycombe, I think. He's an imam. He does amazing work there, and one of the things he was saying is that he just gets everybody in the community involved. People that have restaurants, people that are taxi drivers, people that are, you know, making tea and coffee, people that are accountants, solicitors. Everybody in their capacity can do something for the faith. But a lot of people don't use the skills that they have, the IT skills, the skills in law, teaching, giving a bit of zakat. He said, you know, give a bit of zakat of your speciality and your skill set to the ummah. That is the prophetic method. That is something the Prophet used to get the companions to do. Because remember, he used to look at all the companions and say, oh, he is really good at this, or she's really good at that. Let's develop that. And we don't do that. What we want to do is, okay, that person's got a skill set. How can I use that person? How can I maximize and leverage their skill set to make myself more important or more rich? That's not the prophetic method. And I think that's where we, you know, you leave a gathering of the Mawlid, and you say, okay, that mirror I've got of the Prophet ﷺ, I need to then make a change, and that's really what we were talking about.
Thank you, Shaykh. You're right. It gives you that opportunity to reflect on our own behaviours and our own mindset and how we behave. I just want to touch on the fact you'd mentioned a couple of the names of the Prophet ﷺ, and I think it's important to mention now that there is a course available, an overview of the prophetic titles and names taught by yourself, Shaykh RUZWAN. It is available now on the iSyllabus on demand portal. So if anybody has access to that, you should be able to access that now. And if you don't, please do sign up to that. But yeah, just
so that's something that I did when I was much younger. I mean, I think it's 2014. It's been sitting on my computer for 11 years now, and it was just so it's just been put up. So this is the Dala'il al-Khairat, which is essentially one of the most, civilizationally speaking, one of the most important books in Islam, which everybody had in their homes until, you know, 70, 80 years ago, which is essentially types of prayers in the Prophet ﷺ, salawat or darood, which was written by Imam al-Jazuli. And so in this course, it's kind of 3 lectures I gave at a retreat in Scotland. I basically go through some of the names and just whatever came to my mind in terms of explaining what they are. But what they show is the depth of this person that we're celebrating, marking, commemorating, signifying his importance to our life. The names indicate meanings which indicate inherent qualities, and those qualities were given by God. So it's like you're celebrating and praising God by just looking at those names, like Muhammad, Ahmed, Mahmud, Hamid. You know, these are all just from one thing, which is to praise. And then, you know, Qadi Abu Bakr al-Arabi said over 2,000 names of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, and it's so amazing, because one of the names is Udhunu Khairil Lakum, which is the one whose ears are looking out for you. The ears are looking out for you, meaning he's here, he's listening to what will be of benefit to you. In other words, he's on the lookout for you with his ears. That's a counselor. You know, when you go to a counselor, I know you do a lot of that kind of work. The counselor should be a conduit to benefit the person that comes to them. And the Prophet was that. That's one of his names. Think of that. That's in the Quran. And it's like what we would say, well, how's that a name? It's a name because he's listening out for what is of benefit to you. And so this is who, how can you mark the person who's on the lookout for you is like more than your parents, more than your mother, and your father. So this is what's, you know, one of the things that does sadden me a lot is this, the beneath, under, you know, between the lines of people that want to stop people commemorating the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, is this disowning of the Prophet ﷺ. And there's a lot of people that are not like that. There's a lot of people that don't want to celebrate or commemorate. But I see an undercurrent when I speak to certain people of the fact that there's almost this disconnect with the Prophet ﷺ, which is very dangerous. Because look, if you do not recognize the Prophet ﷺ, he will refuse to recognize you in the Day of Judgment. Like you're just not going to recognize him. When you see his position, you will be filled with rage because you will see that he is Muhammad. He is the praiseworthy. That hate you have of people praising him on earth is essentially part of the hate you have for God, because God named him Muhammad. God named him Ahmed, Mahmud, Hamid. You know, and this is what, you know, I'm just trying to picture how would a person feel in the Day of Judgment when it's he who is brought in front of God standing after he was prostrating and told to intercede for other people. You'll want to say, well, he shouldn't have that right. Well, God is saying he has the right. So for me, there's a dissonance here which is related to you don't understand what he is. Like if you know, when you said what's the proof of celebrating the Mawlid, you don't need a proof, but the name of the Prophet Muhammad itself is an indication that Allah wanted you to praise him. Now you can do that every day of the year, you can do that every moment of your life, you can do it at a specific point. We know that we're allowed to commemorate things in the calendar and mark them, but let's just be a bit more you know, balanced in it. We can say that perfectly okay, and I think that's perfectly okay as well.
Sheikh, you've got a question that's come in. Somebody's asking, how did the Mawlids in Syria differ from the Mawlids held in the UK? That's come through, I think, YouTube.
Okay, so I mean, in Syria, I mean, I was busy studying. So this is the thing. This is the script, isn't it? I mean, I probably went to about 2 Mawlids in all my time in Syria. It was 6-7 years. Now, after everything I've said, you would say, well, no, that's not possible. How can Shaykh Ridwan just go to 2 Mawlids? And I think, yeah, because I was busy. I mean, I was busy. And if you understand what I was saying about my first step in commemorating this is how am I following the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ? And so let's go back to this question anyway. In Syria, I went to the 2 that I went to, it was in a masjid, and they would start with recitation of Quran. There'd be somebody giving out some coffee, small Turkish, you know, autumn Turkish coffee, some water, and there'd be Qaṣā'iդ, and there'd be some speeches by esteemed scholars that were there, and that was it. And at the end, somebody would distribute some sweets to the kids, and that would be it. So, I mean, in the UK, it's influenced a lot by the subcontinent, as you know, and the subcontinent is, I mean, I wouldn't criticize it for this, but it's a very visual society. It likes its color. You know, if you think of, you know, celebrations, lights, and it comes back to the whole area itself. It's a very visual area, and so a lot of people here like celebrate it in that way. That's the way they understand having a proper celebration or a proper commemoration. Like they want to, you know, go out their way to mark something. And it's not befitting, I think, for people to restrict that unless there's a reason. Like you can't just say, I don't like it because I'm more British, I'm more, you know, reserved. You know, I'd rather just have a very plain gathering. I understand that. But some people, especially elder people in our communities, have got their own customs. And as long as the custom's not haram, it's not something that's, you know, reprehensible, I would say let everybody get on with enjoying the type of religiosity that they want to mark. You know, the way that they recognize honoring the Prophet. Some people be left. You can't just dictate how people celebrate things.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Sheikh. I mean, you're right. I mean, it was a first for me at the weekend here in Glasgow to see the procession from Pollock Shields to Govan Hill, and there being a horse and carriage it was a first. That's certainly a first for me. But yeah, I wanted to come back to when
I don't know about that horse and carriage, but
yeah,
I mean, it gets a bit extravagant. I think sometimes it's very difficult for people to get their head around specific ways of commemorating things, because there's other things going on in lots of commemorations. It becomes mixed up with other reasons. Let's just say other reasons for commemorating something. And I think you need to strip it back. I would strongly, advise the community to strip it back to that core meaning of the Prophet ﷺ, not people, not individuals, the Prophet ﷺ. And at that point, you're all servants of the Prophet ﷺ. You're all, people that are foot soldiers of the Prophet ﷺ. Foot soldiers in that very peaceful sense, just in case there's anybody there thinking about stuff. But yeah, absolute foot soldiers, servants, following one leader. And in that sense, you can't make it about anybody but the Prophet ﷺ.
Yeah. Shaykh, we've got about 10 or 11 minutes left there, and what I wanted to kind of come back to was just the kind of takeaways that we should be taking away from this. The Mawlid in itself, what it meant. We understand the kind of literal meaning of it when we talk about the kind of purpose of coming together, the unity, strengthening our love and our connection to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and coming together, but also what you spoke about, which was, and I think that's something that we could perhaps talk about for the last couple of minutes, is that actually it's not just about that moment there. It's what we take away from that and how we behave and how we engage when we leave the gatherings, when we leave the sort of marking, and how we carry that forward in our day-to-day lives. It's something that we all struggle with, myself included. We come away from these particular types of gatherings and you fall back into, default mode of what takes over, whether it's work, whether it's family, whatever it might be. So I think you spoke about it being important that we use those gatherings as a moment to reflect, to listen, to hear, to better understand the characteristics and the beauty of the Prophet ﷺ as well.
Yeah, so I would say that the best way of doing that is looking at the Sīrah, which is his life. Sīrah literally means his sayr, his way of traveling. Especially in difficult situations. I mean, the situation in the world is extremely difficult psychologically. I think what's made it more difficult is that you have complete access to it in a way that you don't have complete access to even your own life. That you can know exactly what's happening in parts of the Muslim world in a way you won't know in your own city, in your own house. And then the pressure of expectation of responding to that and that psychological burden that we all face, of almost guilt in just living, just eating, drinking, and these kind of things. The way that you create a balance there is by looking at the Prophet ﷺ and looking at how he would still have that smile in the midst of, the kind of torture that he was, part of. He was on the receiving end of in Mecca al-Mukarramah. The expelling of the companions from Mecca al-Mukarramah, the hijrah, and basically the flight, you can call it the flight from Mecca to Medina al-Nawwara, the battle of Hunain, the battle of Khandaq, Badr, Uhud, the martyrdom of the great companions in the battle of Mu'tah. All these were immensely dark episodes, but each of those, the Prophet ﷺ, almost all of them, you saw this smile that came out, even in the midst of, when the Prophet was digging the Khandaq, the ditch, the trench in the Battle of Khandaq, of Ahzab. And people were basically fainting out of hunger. And right in the midst of that episode, he's digging the trench, and he's telling them of smiling and telling of the glad tidings of conquering Yemen, conquering the Byzantines, conquering the Persian Empire, giving them so much, optimism. And that's something that our leaders need to do as well. We need to, as parents, we need to do it for our children. As leaders, imams, the minbar is, 10. How many people do you have in a Jum'ah? Those people should be going out with so much optimism and so much expectation of God's victory and compassion, that they should feel unstoppable. But
Hmm.
we're not taking that opportunity because we're not connecting with the Sīrah of the Prophet ﷺ, that we're not just attending a Jum'ah to be told off for, you know, having our socks or our trousers too long or our socks too high or whatever it is nowadays that people are told off about. It's there to tell us about the big picture. It's about the big picture. And if we can just, you know, reconnect and recalibrate our lives with the Sīrah and just read it every year, it's a great opportunity. I mean, if anything, reading the Sīrah once a year and using Rabiʿ al-Awwal this month to be that month, and you don't go to a Mawlid, perfectly okay. Just read the Sīrah. You know, Martin Ling's Sīrah is still, I consider to be one of the most eloquent, you know, expositions of Sīrah. Just to reflect upon that is just such an important thing. Take an episode and try and extract the kind of meanings that you can from that. I think that's probably the best thing you can do.
Thank you, Sheikh. Somebody has asked, and you'd mentioned there, an author there, what Sīrah would you recommend in English to structure around this advice?
So I think the thing about Martin Ling's Sīrah book is that it really captures the tone of the earliest writings in Arabic in a way that no other one has. I mean, I bought a book recently for my children, which was supposed to simplify the Sīrah, but I found it difficult reading. It was kind of, the language wasn't as good as you would. I mean, people need to put more effort into structuring their language so it's readable. Martin Ling's is an amazing readable text and it has that gravitas of honoring the Prophet ﷺ with expressions that befit the Prophet ﷺ. So I think his book is the one I would always recommend. You know, there's always issues with books. There's always small issues with, you know, the content in some certain situations. But I think the fact that people are not reading is a big barrier now. Like people who say, well, we can't read a book that's more than 10 pages long, if you can call that a book. The problem is people don't have patience. So let's do that. Okay, read the whole thing in a year. You know, you take like 4 pages a day or something. I don't know. Or make it a habit. And that would be your self-reflection. That would be the best thing to do.
Thank you, Sheikh. So before we finish up, just a reminder to anybody who's watching and those who will be watching this, on Monday the 15th of September 2025 at 9 p.m, there's going to be a session or a free seminar to discuss the diploma. So the smart way to unlock authentic Islamic knowledge without draining your time, wealth or energy. And both Shaykh RUZWAN and Shaykh AMER will be on that session there. You can register via the iSyllabus website. So please do that if you have an interest in joining the diploma course that's taking place. And as mentioned previously, there is a course available on the iSyllabus on demand, and it's the Blessed Names of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's an overview of the prophetic titles and names. So please do take the time to sign up for those, and they'll definitely be of value. Sheikh, is there any finishing remarks that you wish to give to our audience today?
I mean, the advice is my advice, which is I never engage in debate discussion because it's not worth it. If you get into a situation where you argue with somebody, you've done something the Prophet would never have done, which is to, you know, argue over religion. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is take the opportunity to positively engage with this episode, which is the Sīrah of the Prophet ﷺ and his life and his coming. The fact that he came is a source of celebration in and of itself. I mean, I just cannot get over how somebody could argue otherwise. It's as simple as that. So just get on with it. Just reassess your connection to the Prophet ﷺ through, you know, study of his Sīrah, his life. Reflect upon his names. The fact that somebody has so many names, blessed names. You know, the Dala'il al-Khayrat, this book by Imam Jazuli, just brings all those together in a summarized way. Actually, it's not extensive work. There's a reason why they were, you know, scholars reflected upon his names. And one of the things that you'll know, Amir, is that the more that an entity has names, the more, you know, elevated it is in the eyes of God, the more significant it is. So the names of God are unending. You know, there's a book I've actually got here, which is, you know, considered to have like 3,000 names of the Prophet ﷺ. So it indicates that people just had different ways of, you know, almost like they picked up the specific quality that nobody else picked up, because they were so attuned to his character. You know, when you really want to know somebody, you go into so much detail, like pop stars. There's people that know every intricate detail of the person more than the person themselves. And why is that? It's just because they're infatuated. And so there's, I mean, believe it or not, there's people that are infatuated with the Prophet ﷺ. But there was reasons for that, because they saw what he did.
Yeah.
And I think if you saw what he did, it would give you hope that, you know, the darkness of this epoch that we're going through is still one that has amazing light within its folds. I mean, that's the thing I always think about. If the Sīrah tells me anything about this day and age, it's that, you know, it's like one of our teachers, Habib Umar, said that, you know, people were saying it was such a depressing time. And he said, well, you know, the darkness is at its darkest just before dawn. And that's from the surah of Surah Al-Duha. You know, this is essentially what we're talking about: darkness and difficulty and tribulation and depression comes as a portent of something that will come later, which is enlightening and full of mercy.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, Shaykh, thank you so much. Just something came to my mind. There was something. I mean, we've spoken about this in some depth this evening, and to make it clear, the discussion was about understanding and learning. It's not about debating. And as Shaykh RUZWAN said, we're not out to criticise. And as Shaykh RUZWAN also added there, it's not about getting ourselves into debates with people around this type of thing. And something that came to my mind was another teacher, Sheikh Amin Buxton, brought up, and when he was talking about these gatherings, he talked about the cup of tea and how when you put the sugar into the tea, if it's not being stirred constantly, the sugar sinks to the very bottom, and we need to remember and keep stirring it to keep the tea sweet. And I thought that was a really beautiful sort of analogy or way of kind of thinking about how we keep ourselves constantly stirring with the love of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I think that was quite nice and a good way to leave it there, inshallah. Shaykh, thank you so much for having the discussion with me this evening, and thank you very much to the audience who have tuned in at home. I hope it has been of benefit. Inshallah, keep us in your du'as, and inshallah we will see you on the next session. I believe, Shaykh RUZWAN, there's going to be another session next Monday evening at 9 p.m. and I believe that will be with Shaykh AMER, if that's correct. So everybody, Jazakallah khair, thank you so much, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.